This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
So actually this is very poignant for me personally. This is the Matzeva of the Maharam Schiff. We don't know that the Maharam Schiff is buried here, but this is the Maharam Schiff's Kever. Maharam Schiff was born approximately the year 1605, some say 1608, till 1644, 1641. He was only 36 years old, the Maharam Schiff.
I want credit.
What?
I want credit.
Yeah. And Yarom was the one who found the Matzeva over here. He was born in Frankfurt. His father, Rabbi Yaakov, was Rosh Yeshiva in Frankfurt, and the Maharam Schiff, at 17, he became a Dayan in Fulda, and eventually he became the Rosh Yeshiva. It's interesting, in the Maharam Schiff in Masechta Bava Metzia, Daf Yud Tes, we find that responding to Maharam Schiff was the Maharam. Now, if you make a cheshbon, Maharam Schiff corresponded to Maharam, that means the Maharam of Lublin was responding to the Maharam Schiff when the Maharam Schiff was approximately 12 years old. So already at 12 years old, the Maharam Schiff was already back and forth with the Gedolei Olam, and besides being one of the great masters of the Gemara, he was known as a Baal Shem himself. So the Maharam Schiff was known as a Baal Shem. By the way, in many yeshivas they don't learn the Maharam Schiff because it's very obscure, it's very complex. In order to understand the Maharam Schiff, you have to know the Shakla of the Tarya, the Gemara, crystal clear. It's the Marsha, but the Marsha explains exactly what step of Tosfos he's on and what he means to do. The Maharam Schiff, because of time constraints, wrote his commentary in a very, very concise way that the highest level of knowing the Gemara is required to know the Maharam Schiff. And probably he reaches the pinnacle that you could say that there's no other perush, that you have to know the shakal of Atari of the Gemara, that crystal clear to understand the words of Maharam Schiff. Now he wrote on the whole Shas. Maharam Schiff wrote on the entire Shas between the years 1627 and 1636. However, we only have Beya, Ksubis, Gittin, Bava Metzia, and Chulin, and we have pieces from Shabbos, Megillah, Bava Kama, Bava Basra, Sanhedrin, and Zvachim. Now, in the Hakdama of the Maharam Schiff, his grandson records that the Maharam Schiff told his granddaughter, Henla, that I wrote Sfarim on all of Shas. I wrote on the Dalet Turim. I wrote Ala Torah. I wrote on Kabbalah. And I only have one son, Zanvil. And Zanvil died childless, so I have no heirs. Take all my writings, put it in a box. Somewhere, someone in the family down the line will eventually publish it. And one day, a young man came across the writings. He almost fainted, but he couldn't do anything with them. He gave them over, and unfortunately, a fire consumed all of the writings of the Maharam Schiff, except for the few Masechtas that we have today. And it was published by his grandson between the years 1737 and 1741. Now, if you ever learned the Maharam Schiff, you'll notice in those small, concise words of Maharam Schiff, you have in brackets something called the Biur. The Biur on the Maharam Schiff. That was written 100 years later by Rav Mordechai Mardush, the Av Bezin of Parisk. It's a very, very difficult commentary to understand. And as he was about to publish it, also a fire broke out. And he ran out. He said he couldn't escape with his chairs, with his table, with anything other than the manuscript itself and his soul. It's interesting, the Maharam Schiff was a very fierce, he was one of the Rabbanim here in Frankfurt. So he reprimands his Kehila. You could see this in the end of one of the Masechtas. Maharam Schiff writes, in 1631, so he's the Rav of the city, he's 26 years old. He tells the people, you consider yourself Groisa Lamdanim, big Lamdanim, you like to prav yourself big Lamdanim, and therefore you like to do certain practices. Well, if you consider yourself Lamdanim, why don't you learn something? Why don't you learn Torah? You can't consider yourself a Lamdan if you don't learn anything. And he says, if you're not going to learn anything, l'chol ha'pachos, you need to pay money to support Talmidei Chachamim. So it's interesting, the Maharam Schiff has, in some of the Masechtas, Drushim Nechmadim, like little concise drashas. So I'm just going to share with you two very brief ones. He says like this, Snapir is Gematria 400. Yeah, Snapir. Samach is 60, Nun is 50, Pei is 80, Yud is 10, Resh is 200, 400. Kas, Ke, Ses. Kas is 400, Kas is 400, Tuf is 400, 400, 400, 400. So Snapir is 1 400, Kas Keses is 3 400s. Says the Maharam Schiff, that's Pshat in the Gemara. Snapir the Kazrachman Olamali, once the Torah said Kaskeses, that's 400s, why do we need Nachamala 400? So that's how he explains that Gemara. And then he says another beautiful pshat, a pshat in the Pasuk in Shir Shirim. It says, Kechut Hashani Sifsoi Sayach, like the scarlet thread are your lips. What's pshat in this Pasuk? Kechut Hashani Sifsoi Sayach. It says like this, the same way the red string in the Beis HaMikdash, when it would turn white, that was a sign that Hashem was Meratza and Klal Yisrael, that Hashem appeased Klal Yisrael, that Hashem was Makabel, the Tshuva of Klal Yisrael. We don't have the red string anymore, but what do we have? We have our lips. If your tefillah is smooth, if you daven a smooth tefillah, without distraction, without stumbling and mumbling, like the Gemara says, that Rabbi Chanina ben Doisa, Mshkura tefillasui befi, then I know my tefillah is makubal. Nowadays we don't have the chut hashani. Kechut hashani sifsoi sayach. Like the red string is your mouth. If you daven in a way, and it's fluent, then you know the Rebbeinu Shalom was accepted your tefillah. So actually in the yeshiva that I went to, Yeshiva Chafetz Chaim, they harvan in the Maharam Schiff, like that's like their specialty. It's very, very difficult. You have to know the mamish, the klor, the shtagatari gemara. One time I met somebody. He looked at my forehead, and he said, "It looks like you learned the Maharam Schiff." He told me it looks like you learned the Maharam. I said, "I learned it." But Maharam Schiff is one of the. And if you understand the Maharam Schiff, from the Maharam Schiff, you could get all the lumdus of the Gemara. So,
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.